People who knew someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? A guy I went to high school with was helping his family do some repairs to a silo on their family farm. A section of the silo's roofing gave away and he fell in. He ended up suffocated under thousands of pounds of grain. A mom went ice skating. Little slip, fell, all everyone saw was her bump her head lightly. The family finished skating. On the ride home, she started speaking gibberish. Dad dropped kids at the grandparents and took her to the ER. She had brain swelling, went into coma, then died a week later. There was this guy, 3 years my junior in high school, who I sometimes bumped into. Few years after graduating from high school, I read the local newspaper and saw him there. Apparently, just like most teenagers, one night he had a heated discussion with his family, and then stormed out whatever room he was in, slamming the door behind him. Well, the door was a door window, and the glass broke, and a shard of it stabbed him in the leg. He died from blood loss at home, before the ambulance even showed up. He must have been 17 years old at the time, a real tragedy. My insurance guy was pulling a limb out of a large tree with a chain and a rope. He was behind the pickup, while his wife was driving the truck. The rope snapped from the strain, and the chain snapped back and hit him in the head, killing him instantly. He was in his 50s. Ironically, this is exactly the sort of scenario he would describe as to why you need life insurance. A friend of a friend showed up at his girlfriend's apartment with a head wound. He didn't know how it happened. He also didn't know how he drove over there. She took him to the ER, where he ended up passing away. He had his keys, wallet, and phone on him. The only thing we could think of is he might have tripped, fell, and hit his head in the wrong spot. I knew this kid in high school, who always ran from class to class, pulling his roller backpack behind him. So, it's no surprise when he visited the Grand Canyon with family that he wanted to run down a slope. Well, he got going too fast and couldn't stop himself. His entire family watched him run off the side of the Grand Canyon. My sister-in-law's aunt died of hypothermia. She went for a walk out in the hills in the winter. She knew the trail very well but got disoriented by a light snowfall and got lost. She got cold and tired, laid down by a rock, and died of hypothermia. She was 100 yards away from her car. We were swimming and one of my buddies was screwing with the great thing over a drain at the bottom. He got his foot stuck and couldn't extricate himself. His brother, cousin, and I nearly drowned trying to free him, so we got to watch him drown. I haven't thought about this one in a bit. I was snowboarding in 1997 in Switzerland with a good friend. He was skiing. I had caught an edge and landed on the back of my head, while also twisting my knee badly. I was being looked over by the mountain rescue and first aid. I told my friend he could keep skiing while I would head back to our villa. I ended up going to sleep at around 6 p.m. as I had a hot shower and some Tylenol after dinner. I woke up to see my friend hadn't returned and thought it was odd, but maybe he hooked up with a lady at some bar. My friend never came back from skiing. He was found deep in a crevasse the next afternoon and frozen to death. My uncle was mowing grass on an embankment next to a small body of water. The mower unexpectedly slipped down the embankment and overturned on top of him, pinning him under the water. He drowned in a few feet of water that he otherwise could have stood up in. A guy I went to high school with got hit by a train. It was before Uber, and he had been at a party drinking. He did the responsible thing by taking the subway. When he heard the train coming, he stood up to take a step forward, like everyone does, but was so drunk that he stumbled over his own feet and fell onto the track. Lovely girl I went to high school with got a scholarship to a prestigious university, being one of the very few students from my crappy school to make it to college or university. 2 weeks into term, her roommate found her lying dead in her bed. The heating boiler was faulty, and she had died of carbon monoxide poisoning in her sleep. We had even thrown a party for her to celebrate her achievement. This was in 1996, and I'm tearing up a bit thinking about this. Rest in peace, Sonia. A classmate got killed by a leopard. He studied conservation and was a junior game ranger. From reports, he was bringing tourists back from a late afternoon viewing drive. He stopped on a bridge just before the camp to give the tourists a view of the sunset. He got out of the vehicle to check on something and was ambushed by a leopard. Seems the leopard was old and had teeth problems, so it was moving closer to camps, looking for easy prey. He just happened to be the unlucky prey. An old buddy I had known since elementary school died while driving. A chunk of loose gravel was kicked up through his windshield by a passing truck on the freeway. His best friend had been riding in the passenger side and had to steer the car to safety. It was nobody's fault, just a complete freak accident. I've always felt terrible for the friend who had to watch it happen. I think about my friend who died a lot. He was a really cool guy. I still remember playing basketball with him during recess when we were kids. It's strange to think that he never could have known how his life would end or see it coming in any way. That kid I used to play basketball with thought he still had an entire life ahead of him. My cousin was killed by Chrysler. There was a defect in the hatch of Chrysler minivans, where if they were hit from the inside, they would open unexpectedly. My aunt was moving the car out of the driveway so the other kids could play hockey or whatever, just backing the car into the street. She put my cousin in the back so he wouldn't run behind the car as she pulled out. One of the kids called her name, so she hit the brakes. My cousin lost his balance and hit the inside of the hatch, which opened. He fell out, hit his head, and was taken off life support 3 days later. It later came out that this issue was raised by an engineer, and when he wouldn't drop it, Chrysler fired him rather than fixing it. From a very young age, I have understood that corporations don't care about anything but money. Every pride flag or every donation to a charity are all calculated efforts to maximize revenue, nothing more. Don't ever kneel at the corporate altar. A friend of mine from college had a summer job driving a big delivery truck. At the end of the day, they would come back, park the trucks, and then check the tires to make sure they weren't overheated or required any other maintenance. So, my friend brought his delivery truck back after his shift, and then knelt in front of it to check the tires. One was clearly overheated, so he loosened it to take it off and relieve some of the pressure and heat. The pressure was so great that tire exploded in his face, but that wasn't what killed him. When it exploded, the metal inner wheel of the tire caught him right under the chin. It knocked him backwards with such force that it crushed the back of his head. He was only 22. When I was younger and drove bikes, I was in a bike group. I am consciously not calling it a gang, because it wasn't like that. We just rode for fun together, ate, did some tricks, and filmed ourselves, and that was it. One fateful day we rode together as we always did, on a beautiful mountain road with great weather, late in July. The road we were on, which we all knew and rode regularly, had beautiful curves for biking. One of our older members somehow lost control of his bike in one of those curves. His bike crashed into the barrier, but he slid into the little, vertical metal pole that holds up the barrier. He had full gear on, boots, gloves, complete leather suit with protectors in it, and his helmet. Unfortunately, the pole connected right between his helmet and suit. It took his head clean off, still inside the helmet. I was maybe 2 bikes behind him, almost at the end of the convoy, so I saw it unfold. It took maybe 1.5 seconds in real time, but I swear time stood still for a good minute or so. Still in shock, I called the cops. One of our members that was closer to him called his father. When his dad came, he had to look at his dead son in all this protective gear and pull out his helmet with his head inside. While sitting there contemplating if I would ever ride again, I made one of the biggest mistakes in my life and got a glimpse of his face while it was carried out of the debris. The look of sheer terror frozen in time, I'll never forget it. As he was one of the best riders in this group, we looked everywhere for anything that might have caused the loss of control: leaves, dirt, water, oil, anything on the road. We didn't find anything. The sun was shining, his bike was always clean and finely tuned, and according to the cops, there weren't even any recent crashes on this part of the road for a potential oil spill or leftover debris or something. To this day, I never got the reason as to what may have caused it, but his life ended right then and there. For him the how doesn't matter anyway. A buddy of mine from high school and I happened to go to the same college. He was handsome, a freak athlete, heavy partier, all the girls wanted him, and his family was wealthy. He had it all, but he was a huge unnecessary risk-taker. He felt invincible. He would always succumb to dares or challenges like drinking a whole handle of vodka. Anyway, one summer break we were playing golf. He was on the outside of the golf cart, hanging on, while it was being whipped around the course. The cart hit a big, unexpected bump. He falls off, hits his head on a rock, and dies instantly. I wish I didn't have this story, but a girl I went to high school with was at a gas station filling up her mom's van during spring break, with a friend visiting her from college. A woman hopped the curb losing control of her car and ran into a truck on the other side of the pump. The truck sent the pump into her and pinned her between it and her van. It caught fire and no one could get to her because of the flames. She could be heard screaming, "Help me, I'm going to die!" It was the most shocking and sad story I've ever heard. I knew her brother pretty well, and it was just so surreal and heartbreaking, especially because they were twins. My dad told me a story once about an accident that happened while he was working at a foundry. Apparently, they had this machine that was essentially a giant sandblaster in a booth, and a guy was inside of it working on it. Someone else didn't know there was a person in there and activated it. The material that sandblasters use is very fine, and being inside what was pretty much a giant industrial sandblaster was super deadly. According to my dad, the guy weighed over 1,000 pounds when they pulled him out of it. I'm not sure about that part. It sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but still, it sounds like a horrible way to die.